What a cool introduction. Well, kia ora, Aotearoa. It is tremendous to be here right now in this place, in our beautiful, cool, regenerating and innovative city. But I'm going to take you back 3 months, back to July 16, 2017, 2 months before this incredible general election that we've just had. The co-leader of the New Zealand Green Party, Metiria Burns, stands before a crowd a little bit like this one. She's got an important role to play on this day. If I tell my story, she says, we can start to talk about social welfare. And so she begins. Her voice crackles with emotion, with the importance of what is before her. What you don't know about me, she says, is that I had to tell a lie. And with those words, she reveals that while studying as a student 15 years earlier for her law degree, she had to mislead the social welfare authorities. She didn't reveal that she had some flatmates, and that meant that she received a benefit greater than that she was entitled to. She did this in order to feed her baby, in order to live, in order to study and stay well. And it's with these words that she launches a powerful and visceral discussion in this country. The response is immediate. It's warm. There is an outpouring of support for Metiria. Hashtag I am Metiria burns hotly on the Twitter sphere as a trending hashtag. Others with stories of hardship within a punitive welfare system tell their story. The Greens are looking to launch a new policy suite that they say will mend the safety net within this country, that will introduce social welfare reform that will be less punitive, that will be kinder on people in their time of greatest need. But elsewhere, there is a political train wreck bearing down. Another story is being told, and that story is being told by those with the most to gain from a weakening of the Greens. And that's the story of Metiria, the benefit fraudster, the woman who wanted to be in power but had told a lie. Now, we all know how the story ends. The scrutiny upon Metiria and her family was simply too great, and she was forced to stand down. And we now know, of course, that the New Zealand Green Party is in support position in government, the most powerful it has been in its 20-year history, and we now, of course, have Green ministers who sit outside Cabinet. This must be heartbreaking for Metiria, who worked so hard for so long to represent the people who she represented. As she packed up her office in the wake of all of this, 3 caricatures began to emerge. Number 1, Metiria, the victim of sexism, racism, and a post-colonial hegemony. Number 2, Metiria, the benefit fraudster, the woman who had lied in order to gain political capital. And caricature number 3 was Metiria as the committed, hard-working politician who had taken a political gamble, rolled the dice, and simply got it wrong. In every version of these truths, her position had become untenable. But did it need to be this way? Could we not have had a better social discourse around this critically important topic for New Zealand? Could we not have had a discussion that took us to a kinder place? Well, I think we could. But I think it comes down to all of us to start to change our behaviours and to change the way that we enter into social discourse. It's up to you, to me, and every one of us who cares about New Zealand. In the 20 years that I've worked as a journalist, I have learned to understand a great deal about all of you. I understand New Zealand audiences. I understand what you read, what drives you to read it, and what will make you more likely to read a piece of content. But also in that time, I've learned to understand that in order to understand New Zealanders, you need to understand those with vastly different viewpoints than your own. But that's harder than it ever has been before. Why? Because we are all now living inside these things called filter bubbles. So what's a filter bubble? Term's not mine. It was first coined by social media activist and Upworthy CEO Eli Pariza. He wrote a great book by the same name back in 2011. Excuse me. He also gave a really super TED talk that I advise you all jump on and have a look at after this. And in that, he said, the internet shows us what we want to see, but not what we need to see. What we want, not what we need. And he argued that it was up to the social media giants, who he called the new gatekeepers, to fix the problem. He argued the coders should get along and do their thing, recode the algorithms so that they were kinder, they allowed a much more socially and civically engaged conversation. His words were powerful and compelling, yet 6 years on, we are as isolated and divided as ever. So what is a filter bubble? Well, a filter bubble is when readers are locked into streams of content that reinforce their ideological viewpoint and worse, prejudices. They've always existed. Back in the old days before the internet, you guys remember that? You won't, right? Yeah. There was that time, and there were these things called echo chambers, and we all know how they worked. It's when people listened to one particularly partisan talkback show, and talkback land was pretty crazy back in those days, or read one particularly partisan print publication. But increasingly, filter bubbles are created by the very technology upon which we have become reliant and addicted. Social media spoon feeds us content that is targeted at an audience of one. Hyper relevant to our lives, hyper connected, and we quite like that because it's content that we relate to. Our technology also connects us to others who share the same view, and again continues to reinforce those same ideologies. It's been proven that the content that we receive through our social media feeds can even impact our moods. And within those types of environments, very quickly, viewpoints become truths. And this has been proven with alarming efficiency in the past 12 months. Millions of people, many of us in this room, I'm sure, felt blindsided by the election of Donald Trump and by Brexit. Why? Because we never looked outside our own viewpoint to see these massive social movements that were coming towards us. On the eve of the US election, the New York Times, which I absolutely adore, was predicting with a high probability a Clinton win. I believed them, and so did my Facebook feed, because it was full of content by people who believed it to be true and wished it to be so. Man, did they let me down. And we all know what that looks like now. The documentary maker Michael Moore put it best when he said, we were all inside our bubbles and we didn't pay attention to our fellow Americans. Didn't pay attention. Ouch. And when we're in that situation where we're not paying attention or we're not attempting to understand and look through the eyes of others, there's another problem that can emerge. We start to shout at one another. And even worse, we shout past one another. And this creates a situation where we're not attempting to gain an understanding of our fellow man. There's a really interesting US commentator by the name of Brett Stevens. He's got some pretty extreme views, and he is no stranger to being shouted down. He was over in Australia last month, and he talked to a press freedom forum. And there he argued that we've lost the ability to constructively disagree. And he put it like this. He said, we not only have our own opinions, we have our own facts. And I think there's another term for that, alternative facts. And we all know where that goes, to this place called fake news. And we shouldn't assume that we are in any way immune in this country. Social media penetration in New Zealand is wide and deep, And I'm sure many of you would be on social media right now had you all been not told to turn your phones off. Last month, 2.7 million New Zealanders logged on to Facebook. Here in Canterbury, 320,000 of us logged on last month. And when we did, we clicked to refresh an average of 19 times per day. That kind of penetration is matched only by Google and stuff.co.nz in this country. So you can start to see how very quickly we become locked into very narrow sources of content. Now, Facebook itself has acknowledged the extent of this issue. Earlier this year, Mark Zuckerberg wrote a bit of a treatise on this, and he talked about how Facebook could become that place which is safe and kind and helps people engage in civil conversations. He argued that Facebook could help end some of the isolation that technology had created. Other technology companies are also having a go at fixing this problem, and you can now get apps that you can plug into your browser that will help refilter your social feeds to expose you to a greater range of content. And the media companies take it really seriously too. I know because I have obviously worked as an editor. All of the mainstream media companies in this country work really hard to present a diversity of viewpoint, and new entrants into the market are also filling in the niches. Internationally, the New York Times, BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, and others all introduced new content in the wake of the US election, acknowledging the problems that had occurred and to help people read across the aisle. But I argue the fastest way to get outside your filter bubble is to do it yourself. The power is in our hands. So my call to action today is not to the social media giants, it's not to the editors who curate content on your behalf, it's to you. Reach outside your filter bubble and pop it yourself. If we all take steps to do this, then we start to engage in a far more constructive conversation. So what are the steps? Step number 1, awareness. Know that there's a problem and it's our obligation to fix it. Step number 2, acceptance. Accept the rights of others to have viewpoints that differ from your own. It's a really, really good thing. Diversity of viewpoint and freedom of expression are fundamental to a safe society. Step number 3, listen well and read widely. Seek out the views of others. Seek the views of the journalists who you hate. Listen to the commentators who have views that are vastly different than your own. And you're all going to groan when I say this, but read the comments on the bottom of stories. There is a diversity of viewpoint, a tapestry of views sitting there waiting to be absorbed. Step number 4, read those comments and then critically analyse them. Take the time to pay attention to those views of others and even be prepared to take on some of those viewpoints where critical analysis gives them validity. And step number 5, and this I think is the most important of all, never shout or sneer at others. Before you send that oh so clever but caustic tweet, think again. Don't assume that your viewpoint comes from a place of kindness and others are harsh and uncaring. Think again. Don't assume that the strength of your conviction gives you the right to shout at another. Think again. Take the time to respond a little differently with greater empathy. And when you do this, you may just find that someone reaches back and you start to engage in a far more constructive conversation. This is why I will often take the time to log on to blogs of those with whom I often wildly disagree. I'm not going to name them now, but there is certainly a great diversity of viewpoint available. Not because I think that these polemicists will drive me to my true north, but because I want to understand their viewpoint, and I love them. Why? Because they are us. They are New Zealanders. These are the people we work with, we shop with, we ride buses with, and most importantly, we vote with. And until we understand that diversity of viewpoint, we can't possibly hope to understand our community. So I invite all of you today to reach out, to pop your filter bubble. And when you do, you will find that we are starting to talk about the areas that we share rather than where we differ. We will start to find we are building common conversations and working together to solve the problems that our community faces. When we do that, we start to look through the eyes of others, and we have truly popped our filter bubble to the benefit of a stronger, safer, kinder community. Pop your filter bubble today. Thank you.